have my pee while staring out into the dark, and then light up a cigarette and stand by my car. As I'm standing there, I see the figure of a man just walking out of the tree line. I'm miles from civilization, patchy cell service, and there isn't a soul on the road. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, and maybe it was a deer, but no, this was a man. So I calmly walk back to the driver's door and get in, locking the door behind me, and keeping my eye out on this guy as I nervously smoke and have my car and drive, ready to peel it out. But for some reason, I just stayed put. The guy walks right up to my passenger door and knocks on the window. It cracked the window. I ask, "What's up?" He replies to me in a very serious tone, "I need you to call the cops." I cautiously ask why, and he tells me he had gone out into the woods to unalive himself, but he couldn't go through it because he had thought of his daughter right before he was about to do it. I call the cops while the guy quietly cries outside. He had a kitchen knife that he was gonna use on himself. So I stayed in the car and advised him to maybe leave the knife on the ground before the cops arrived. The cops came and got him, but with him. I gave him a solid heart to heart and wish him well. I still think about him. I hope he was able to turn things around. Truckers here. I think the best creepy thing that ever happened to me was I was heading from Tucson, Arizona, up into Salt Lake City, Utah. Well, this was a few years ago, and the main highway had been taken out in a flash flood, was under construction, so I had to take a weird detour through the mountains in lower Utah. Well, it was getting late, and I was getting tired, so I pulled off into the shoulders and went to sleep in my bunk. Now, this was in the middle of nowhere. Closest town was like 40 miles away. It's completely pitch black outside once I turned the lights off. Anyways, around 4 a.m., I wake up because I'm hearing something messing with my truck, like playing with the air and powder cables between my cab and the trailers, which is literally 6 inches from where my head is at, but on the outside of the cab. Then I feel something climb onto the landing that's on the back of my truck, and it shakes my whole truck. So I'm guessing something around 200 to 300 pounds was climbing around back there. I'm thinking like a mountain lion or a bear. At this point, I'm wide the F awake, and I want to get this thing away from me. So I slam my hand into the cab while trying to scare whatever is out there. Slam hard enough to really make it loud. And then I hear someone, a male, scream bloody murder. I hear them all off the back of my truck. And I hear about 15 other people around my truck yelling. They're all around. I climb up front, turn on my lights, and illuminate a squad of army reservists doing their midnight ruck march capture drills. Turns out these guys were supposed to go find an abandoned truck and secure it for the midnight drills. The truck was 3 miles back down the hill. They were not expecting me to be sleeping there. I was part of the drill. I'm an ex-military, so after explaining I was not part of their test and legit was there out of coincidence, we laughed it off. I had a radio to their CO and tell him and not have the other squads bother me. So this story didn't happen to me. It actually happened to my very good friend. We'll call him Dan. Dan is a 5'10" male from Maryland.
He has a very strange sense of humor. And he's very smart, but an all around good guy. Anyways, we got to the same university. I'm going to tell this story as best as I can, and so bear with me. Dan moved into his dorm room before his roommate did in our freshman year. Dan had everything all moved in and settled in just as he sat down. His roommate showed up to move everything in. His roommate, we'll call him Brian, introduced himself and his mother and his father, who were helping him move things, much like any other person. Dan decided to help his new roommate move everything in since he didn't know anyone yet, as he was from a different state. So Dan and Brian's family get down to the car as Brian stayed behind in the room to put things away. This is the first red flag in the story. As they open the trunk, Brian's father looks at Dan directly in the face and says, "Good luck." Dan, thinking he meant with classes, said thanks and grabbed the box. Boy, was he wrong. Dan carried that box upstairs into the room, where Brian proceeded to flip out. He screamed about the box. He had special ingredients for a project he was doing, and then probably broke it. Weird, but everyone has their quirks. They finished moving Brian in, and his parents said goodbye. And again, Brian's dad told Dan, "Good luck," which is really weird. But anyways, a couple of guys came by the door to ask if they wanted to go out and eat, and Dad said sure. But Brian stayed behind to finish unpacking his stuff. While Dan was eating, he gets a call from Brian asking if he wouldn't mind if he smoked weed in his room. Dan, being that he wants to work for the CDC, said absolutely not. Brian screamed something unintelligible and hung up the phone. Called him back a few minutes later and asked if he could smoke weed in the closet again. Dan said no. Brian hung up without a word, and Dan and his friend decided to go make sure he wasn't actually smoking weed in the room. When they got there, they found him in the closet eating the weed. Weird as hell. Not even close to as bad as this gets. At night, Brian would wake Dan up by standing beside his bed, then asking him one question. Dan will answer, and Brian will walk back to his bed and go to sleep. This happened every night for a week. At this point, Brian had moved an entire toolbox full of wrenches, screwdrivers, hammers, nails, screws, and assortments of power tools. Things that weren't needed in the dorm room. During the entire week, Brian never left the room. The only time he left was to eat and go to the bathroom, thankfully. About 4 days before the week where the dorm room changes could be made, Brian woke Dan up in the middle of the night and asked him how he felt about gay people. Dan said he didn't really care what anyone did and it was fine with him. Dan woke up the next morning with Brian sitting in the chair directly by his head, staring at him. Dan instantly yelled, "What the fuck are you doing?" Brian replied, "I'm starting to have feelings for you. You need to move out. I don't want you getting hurt during this, what is coming." After that, Dan left and didn't sleep in his room for a couple of days until he could move. Unfortunately, there wasn't no open rooms, so he couldn't move. During this time, Brian started to follow Dan around. Brian would sleep in the closet with his tools, making something. Dan eventually convinced the head of the dorm to let him move into the now empty room next to him. After 3 weeks in what he described as hell, Dan moves to the room next door. No big deal, right? Wrong. 2 days later, Dan gets a knock on the door at 9 a.m., thinking it was the guy on his floor that he had become friends with, fucking with him. He screams, "What the fuck do you want?" and answers the door in his boxers. At the door was 4 state police troopers in full hazmat gear. The trooper in front of him said, "Not who you were expecting, So at least someone had a sense of humor. They let Dan put some clothes on and then let him out the door. At the end of the hallway was Brian's in handcuffs. Turns out, Brian had been building pipe bombs and other bombs in the dorm room while Dan was at class. After Dan had moved out, he took over the other bed and the closet for his bomb-making activities. The reason the hazmat team was there was because Brian had spilled liquid mercury all over the floor, and they were afraid it went into the other rooms. When they went through Brian's things, they found out a plan that also had guns hidden around the city. The kid had planned a massive attack, but he had written Dan's name down with a heart around it and wrote, "Do not kill." Brian's obviously in jail now. And that concludes our YouTube story for today for Reddit. Thank you for whoever's watching. This is my first video, and I hope to see you guys soon again. Not sure what I'll be making, but I am positive that I do like reading these stories, and this one that we just read was definitely something more weird and scary. However, I definitely want to know your opinions on it, and the other 2 stories were pretty interesting too. I wouldn't say they were scary, but hopefully in the future I can start uploading and finding more better videos. But I definitely hope that you guys understand that I am new on YouTube, and I hope to plan and make something bigger of myself. Excuse me. If you guys are, well, out of your heart, a like, a comment, or whatever, or just suggestions to help me grow my channel. And I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you.